I don't think I'll ever forget that night. It started out so normal, so fun. My friends and I were driving through the countryside on a road trip, just enjoying the quiet roads and the open sky. It was supposed to be a carefree weekend, just us, music blasting, snacks everywhere, and miles of freedom ahead of us. Everything was fine until the car broke down. We didn't see it coming. One second we were cruising along, and the next, the car stuttered, jerked, and completely died. Jake was driving, and I remember how his face twisted in confusion as he turned the key over and over, but the car wouldn't start. It was weird because the gas tank was full, and we'd had no problems earlier. We were stranded. It was the middle of nowhere. No other cars on the road, no houses or gas stations in sight, just miles of empty asphalt cutting through dense woods. The sun was setting, and the sky was turning dark shades of orange and purple. I felt the chill creeping in, both in the air and in my chest. "We should call someone," suggested, pulling out her phone. No signal. None of us had any bars. We tried walking a little, holding our phones up high, hoping for something, but the result was the same. Great. Now what? Let's walk. There's got to be something up ahead. A gas station or a house, anything. I didn't love the idea, but what choice did we have? Sitting in the car all night wasn't an option, so we grabbed the flashlight and started walking. The road stretched, and the woods on either side were eerily quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence, broken only by the crunch of our footsteps. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was nothing there, just darkness swallowing up the road behind us. After what felt like hours, we saw a faint light. It was small and flickering, like it was coming from a lantern or a candle. My heart lifted a little. "There," I pointed. "Do you see that?" We all picked up the pace, hurrying toward the light. As we got closer, we saw it was coming from a small cabin nestled in the woods. Relief washed over me. Finally, running ahead. The cabin looked abandoned. The windows were boarded up, and the front door was cracked open, swaying slightly in the breeze. That should have been my first warning, but I was so focused on finding help that I didn't care. Jake pushed the door open, and we stepped inside. The air inside carrying a strange, sour smell. The place was dusty and cluttered, with furniture that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. On one wall hung old family pictures, but the faces were scratched out. That sent a chill down my spine. "This place Mia whispered, staying close to me. On the table, Jake found a map. It was a hand-drawn map of the area, but it had strange symbols and markings all over it. Circles, X's, and odd runes I couldn't make sense of. "What do you think?" he asked, turning the map toward me. I don't know, couldn't stop staring at it. Something about it felt wrong. Then the door slammed shut behind us. The sound echoed through the cabin, making us all jump. I spun around, but no one was there. "Did you shut the door?" I asked. "No," he said, his voice low. That's when we heard it, footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was pacing back and forth. We froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might. "We need to get out of here," Mia whispered. Jake tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was stuck or locked or, I don't even know. The footsteps upstairs stopped. Then came a voice, raspy. It said, "Why are you here?" We all screamed. Jake grabbed shown it toward the stairs, but the light flickered and went out. In the darkness, I felt something brush against my arm. I screamed again, louder this time. A faint light appeared, not from the flashlight, but from somewhere upstairs. It cast long shadows down the staircase, and in those shadows, we saw muddy footprints appearing, one by one, coming down toward. "Run!" Jake shouted. We all pushed at the door with everything we had. I don't know how, but it finally opened, and we stumbled out into the night. We ran like our lives depended on it, crashing through the woods, barely able to see where we were going. I don't know how we found the road again, but we did. And there, sitting like it had never been broken, was the car. The engine started on the first try. As Jake sped away, I looked back. In the distance, the cabin was barely visible, but in the doorway stood a figure. It didn't move, didn't chase us. It just stood there, watching. We didn't stop. Came up. That was the last road trip we ever took. It was a quiet evening when I decided to take a walk around the old neighborhood. The small town I had moved to felt empty, isolated, but peaceful. My new home sat on the outskirts, far from the bustling center, tucked away between fields and a few abandoned buildings. I'd only been here a few weeks, and I was still getting used to the silence that seemed to hang in the air. I stepped out the front, air brushing against my skin. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the sky was tinged with purple and orange. It was the kind of evening that made you feel like you were the only one left in the world. I started walking down the road, which was mostly empty. I passed a couple of houses, their lights dim, windows dark. The whole area felt like it had been forgotten, like a place that time had left behind. The streetlights flickered occasionally, their dull light casting strange shadows on the cracked pavement. I didn't realize how far I'd walked until the houses faded away behind me. I found myself standing in the middle of nowhere, just me, the dark road, and the endless fields stretching out on either side. I looked around, wondering if I should turn back, but the thought of the silence behind me made me hesitate. I kept walking, convinced I would find something to break the monotony of the endless stretch of road. That's when I saw it, a house in the distance, standing alone in the middle of the fields. It looked old, weathered, abandoned. The windows were boarded up, and the front yard was overgrown with weeds. I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't been there when I first started my walk. I blinked and looked again, but the house remained, just as strange as before. Curious, I walked toward it. The closer I got, the more it felt like I was being drawn to it. Something about the house felt wrong, like it was pulling me in, and yet I couldn't stop myself. I walked across the yard, stepping over uneven patches of grass, my footsteps muffled by the stillness around me. When I reached the porch, I stopped. The door was slightly ajar, creaking softly with the breeze. It was an invitation, though I wasn't sure why I felt compelled to go in. A sense of unease settled in my stomach, but I pushed it away. I was just being paranoid, right? I stepped inside, the door groaning behind me. The air inside was stale, the smell of dust and mildew thick in the room. The faint light from the setting sun barely reached through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. I could see nothing but the dim outlines of furniture covered in old sheets. The silence was so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. Then I heard it, a faint sound, almost imperceptible at first. A soft whispering, coming from somewhere deep within the house. I froze, straining to hear. It sounded like my name. I turned, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The house was still, but the whispering continued, now louder, clearer. Come closer. The voice sent a chill through me, and I took an instinctive step back. I wanted to leave, to run, but something held me there. The whisper came again, more urgent this time, pulling me deeper into the house. The floor creaked beneath my feet as I moved, every step heavy with dread. I walked down a narrow hallway, the whispers leading me forward. They were coming from behind a door at the end of the hall. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. When I opened the door, I was met with darkness. I stepped inside. The air was colder, and I could feel the presence of someone, watching me. I couldn't explain it, but it was as if the room itself was alive, its walls breathing with the same rhythm as my own heartbeat. Then, I saw them. In the corner of the room, faint and barely visible, stood a figure. It was tall, shadowy, its features indistinct, but I could feel its gaze, sharp and cold. It didn't move, but it was watching me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The whispers were now a chorus, a cacophony of voices, all calling my name. "Get out!" one voice hissed. "Stay!" another urged, soft and inviting. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me. My pulse raced as I sprinted back down the hall, out the front door and into the yard. I didn't stop running until I was back on the road, gasping for air. The house loomed behind me, still, quiet, as if nothing had happened. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, my heart still pounding, my mind racing, but the whispers didn't stop. They followed me all the way home, a constant murmur in the back of my mind, until I shut the door behind me and locked it tight. But I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't alone, and neither was that house. It was the kind of night where the world felt too quiet, too still. The sky above was a deep black, with only a few stars scattered like pinpricks of light. The road stretched endlessly ahead of me, my headlights the only source of light in the thick darkness. I had been driving for what felt like hours through endless stretches of empty land, with nothing but barren fields and a few scattered trees. My phone had no signal, and the gas gauge was dangerous. I'd passed the last town hours ago, and I wasn't sure where I was anymore. I just needed to find somewhere, anywhere, to stop. When I saw the lights up ahead, my heart skipped a beat. It was a gas station, or at least, that's what it looked like. There were no other signs of life, just the glowing lights flickering in the distance. I pulled into the station, my tires crunching on the gravel as I parked next to one of the pumps. The place was old, the neon sign above the pumps buzzing faintly, the flickering open sign doing little to reassure me. The station looked like it hadn't been used in years. The building itself was small and run down, with peeling paint and cracked windows. There was a rusty, empty car sitting near the entrance, dust covering its windows. I stepped out of the car, feeling a chill run down my spine as I walked toward the door. The wind picked up, rattling the few loose objects around the station. It was dead silent, aside from the soft hum of the neon lights. No sounds of life, no animals, not even the usual buzz of insects. I pushed open the door, the bell above it ringing eerily as I stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit, the lights buzzing in the corner like an old fridge. The air smelled of stale coffee, old oil, and something else, something metallic, like rust. The shelves were cluttered with dusty cans and expired snacks. There was an old coffee machine in the corner, a few chairs scattered around a small table, and an ancient jukebox in the corner, silent and still. Behind the counter stood a man, looking like he hadn't moved in ages. His clothes were worn, and his skin was pale, almost sickly, as if he had seen too little sunlight in his life. His eyes were dark, his gaze unnervingly calm. "You need gas?" he asked, his voice rasping as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. I nodded, feeling uneasy under his stare. "Yeah, please, and maybe some directions. I'm not sure where I am." The man didn't say anything. He just nodded and motioned toward the pumps. I stepped back outside, still feeling the weight of his gaze on me. As I filled up my tank, I noticed something strange. The station's sign, the one that was flickering with the word "open," suddenly went dark. The neon buzzed for a moment and then fell silent, leaving me in the pitch black. I finished filling the tank and went back inside, hoping to pay and leave as quickly as possible. But when I stepped through the door, the man wasn't behind the counter anymore. The place felt even emptier than before, like it had been abandoned. My heart raced. I didn't remember hearing him leave. I walked cautiously toward the counter, calling out, "Hello, is anyone here?" There was no answer. A sudden noise came from the back room, like a dragging sound, something scraping slowly against the floor. My eyes darted toward the door that led to the back of the station. The air around me seemed to grow colder, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to get back in the car and drive as far as possible, but my feet were frozen to the spot. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and bolted for the door, but just as I reached for the handle, the door slammed shut in front of me. My breath caught in my throat. The lights above flickered and buzzed as if something was pushing against the power. Then I saw him. The man was standing behind me now, only he wasn't the same. His eyes were black, no pupils, just empty voids. His skin had a sickly gray pallor, and his mouth stretched into a twisted grin. His hands hung at his sides, unnaturally long, fingers curling like claws. "You shouldn't have stopped here," he said, his voice now low, almost a growl. "Now you're part of it." My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, my mind racing for an escape. The room seemed to close in on me, the shadows growing darker, thicker. The jukebox suddenly came to life, a haunting melody spilling into the room. But it wasn't music, it was a warped, distorted tune, like something was playing it wrong, over. The man stepped forward, his movements jerky and unnatural. The door behind me slammed open, and I darted out into the night. My car was still there, but the station was already starting to fade behind me, like it was melting into the dark. I didn't look back. I didn't stop to see if it was still there. I drove through the night, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I couldn't get the man's twisted grin out of my mind, or the sound of the jukebox playing its eerie song in the distance. When I finally made it to the next town, I tried to tell someone about the station, but no one knew what I was talking about. They all looked at me like I was crazy. Later, I checked the map. The gas station wasn't listed anywhere, and no one could tell me where it had been.